in Astros. I can say fantastic because I believe it. Even if the Astros right now are not fantastic, I'm here as always with Mike Stanton. Mike, it's been an interesting couple of weeks.
Man, you put pressure on us right out of the box.
That's right. No, we now we have to be good.
Oh my
We
goodness.
can't just mail it in
That's
at this point.
right.
That's
That's
all.
right.
That's it. Um, so there are a few topics. Obviously, we're going to hit on today. Uh, let's start with the injuries because I think
Oh,
Carlos Correa
again.
was interviewed and he's obviously become the leader of this team again,
Mm,
and he was like, we can't blame it on injuries, but
true.
at some point you have to start asking yourself, is this as good a team? I will use a simple in city example, and
Hmm.
that's the Houston Rockets. The Rockets lost two of their most glue players, and Fred VanVleet and Steven Adams, one before the season, one during. They're not as good as they probably would have been with them. And I don't think there's any harm in saying that. Obviously, injuries take a toll on every team, but the healthier teams tend to win more games. That's just kind of
Sure.
how it is, or at
I
least
mean,
the teams with
hey,
more depth, anyway.
to take a little adage from the horse racing game, the horse has to be in the race to win.
That's
And
exactly
and
right.
that's really what's happening here. And
Participation
I
counts.
think to tell you the truth, I think there's question how good this team was when they were completely healthy.
You're right.
And there were questions, was the lineup top heavy? They
Right.
talked, Dana Brown talked a lot about how much depth they have in their pitching, which is
Yes.
completely being tested. And then we could talk about some of the decisions they've made to go on top of the
Sure.
injuries. But there's question. Yeah, you may have pitching depth, but do you have the high end pitching depth that
Correct.
you lose a bona fide number two in Framber Valdez, and who do you replace him with? Well, not another number two. And so
Nope.
it's just one of those situations that once the ball starts rolling down the hill, it's very, very difficult to stop it. And this team right now, I think this team right now is in trouble. I'm just going to tell you my thoughts. I think their
Mhm.
pitching staff, their rotation has been abysmal. I think that their bullpen is completely overtaxed, even though
Yes.
they haven't pitched well, but they're also having to cover 12, 13, 14 outs a night, a game, and no bullpen is actually made to do that and win baseball games.
It always reminds me of that joke about two women at a resort eating the food. The one woman says, "The food here is so terrible," and the other woman says, "Yeah, and in such small portions." It's like, it's like basically,
Right.
it's like you're overtaxing a lineup that's not very good.
Sure, sure.
It's bad. And
Well,
now you
and
got, yeah,
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, well, I was going to say that then we always have to say sample size, sample size,
Of
sample
course.
size, and listen, that is a valid point at this point. You're only
Hmm.
less than 3 weeks into the regular season
Right.
or whatever the actual game total is, but the old say, you can't win the division in April, but you can lose it. And,
Hmm.
luckily this last road trip, well, is over. They got through that. Now, does that mean anything's changing? Not necessarily, but at least they get to come home. I
Right.
mean, 5 players going on the IL in a matter of one road trip is it's just spectacular in a terrible way.
It's unreal, and now you consider Jeremy Pena's on there too,
Mhm.
along with Jake Myers. Um, it's a situation where I really think when you get into, the Astros were not playing well without the injuries, right? So we can
Right.
set that aside. They were not playing well anyway. Although offensively, they're playing
They
the
had that.
best
They had that
baseball.
run. They got off to a terrible start first two
Yeah,
games. It looked like they hadn't even gone to spring training yet.
right.
At least offensively, they did. And then they went on a tear. And
Yeah,
they're still one of the better. When you look at the overall numbers, they're still one of
yeah,
the better offensive teams
they
in
are.
Major League Baseball. But you have to look deeper into that. What have you done for me lately?
Right.
And that series in Seattle, that just didn't go well in any way, shape, or form.
No, it was a bad overall look, and I do think you have to consider the injury thing. I know Carlos Correa doesn't want to. Nobody wants to make excuses, but there is a point. Listen, and it's funny. I texted Blummer the other day when he was on the air.
Mhm.
I just messaged him, and it was after I guess who was the kid that out after like 2 innings or whatever.
That Bolton?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I I messaged him and I said my condolences on your arm injury. I said I'm just assuming since you work for the Astros. It's like I
Yeah.
just feel like that, like if you work for the Astros, I mean, you could be in their marketing department and you might be down with a pinched nerve or something. I don't know.
Sure,
I like
sure.
who
Yeah.
knows at this point. It's insane.
Your
Um
left hand's not working on the keyboard right.
no, that's right. You're just sort of like you've got carpal tunnel. Anything
Yeah.
is possible at this point. It
Well,
just seems very
and then you
cursed.
have to I think we also need to at least touch on some of the decisions they've made while they're
Sure.
going through these injuries. I
Yeah,
mean,
sure.
you bring up JP France, who is not stretched out, and then
Nope.
and you want to talk about bad optics, and then you have Spencer Arrighetti, throw 6 great innings in AAA, and
Mhm.
his best start of his career is actually against the Seattle Mariners in Seattle. Just the optics aren't quite there, also, and then you could even go back prior to that when they did call up Bolton, and they have Bolton start instead of Ryan Weiss.
Right.
And
Right,
even
right.
though he pitched well through 4 innings, then you bring in a starting pitcher that you signed to be a starting pitcher.
Mhm.
You bring him in. He's never been in a situation that he's come in with inherited runners. I mean,
Right.
it was just
There's
again,
so
if you
many
want to
weird
call it
things.
optics or whatever you want to call it, that was just you know. But that's also not hindsight's 2020. I
Yeah.
mean, I was questioning that when it started. I go, why don't you
Sure.
start the starter?
It is bizarre. I mean, they've definitely made some odd choices. I obviously with the way this season has unfolded, like every choice at this point is going to come under a microscope and
Of
deservedly
course.
so. But yeah, there have been some really odd ideas about who should be in there.
Mhm.
They seem to be rolling the dice pretty well with their offense, but when it comes to pitching, man, I feel like snake eyes every time they go out.
Right.
I mean, Mike Burrows did them a favor last night, right? He did them a mitzvah by going out there and throwing, I guess was it 7 innings, 6 innings? He threw 6
6 innings.
innings
Yeah.
and he got blown up in 6 innings, right?
Yeah, he took one for the team. He
He
took one
did,
for the team.
but they didn't have a
And
choice.
Ryan Weiss did the same thing when coming
Yeah,
in after Bolton. That
right,
listen, we got it. Somebody's got to record these outs.
right.
And yeah, we want to win the baseball game, but we still have baseball for the next week straight.
Yeah,
We can't kill everybody today
right.
and expect to win some games down the road. So
Yeah,
that just a bad situation. And what makes it even worse is the sample size. Is that this
right.
is a you know you're right at the beginning of the season. You're already running people out there
Yeah,
that the fan base is probably scratching their head. Who is this dude? It's really one of those situations. And the bigger issue for me is show me when it gets better. Show me how
right.
it's going to get better.
Right. They've
And
already run 15 different pitchers out there. The only team that's run more pitchers out there is the Blue Jays, and they're even more decimated by injuries than
right,
we are.
yeah,
It's just I mean, I'm not sure what to say about it. And also, we'll have to come back to it at some point down the
mhm,
line. Maybe as we get closer to the middle of the season. We really do have to again talk about what is happening within this Astros organization when it comes to injuries. Now, in fairness, we don't have the depth to protect guys from injuries, right?
right,
We don't have the farm system that has the kind of depth that says, okay, we lose a guy, we bring a guy up, whatever.
mhm,
We can't just plug and play like some teams can. Nevertheless, I'm having struggling to find real good reasons why the Astros specifically over the last 3 straight years have had this problem so specifically. And at some point, listen, we're in the last year of a number of contracts. I
sure,
don't think both Joe Espada and Dana Brown are in the last year of their contracts.
mhm.
I don't think anybody survives if this Astros team continues to be as bad as they are, and probably nor should they. But I do have to wonder, where are we on all that? They brought in a brand new team of doctors,
Yeah.
brand new everything, and yet here we are in this kind of the same position we were last year.
So I always it always makes me chuckle, if not outwardly, inwardly, when strength conditioning coaches get
Right.
fired, when trainers
Yeah.
get fired,
Right.
when these guys are the bottom. They're
Oh,
they're the
yeah.
bottom of the totem pole. They are not the ones that are calling any of these shots. Even you have what they call the medical staff, or the medical department that covers the
Mhm.
team. There's a team doctor, but there are several other people that are involved in these
Oh, yeah.
situations. And the crazy thing is, what have we seen? This is one of the leading organizations to make sure no one plays 162 games. They've really pushed the idea of a six-man rotation, even if they don't say six-man rotation.
Yeah, and rotating the DH is another
Uh,
thing they've done pretty consistently.
right, and they do that with the idea of trying to keep your players healthy. Well, your players are supposed to be on the field.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that guys can't use the extra days off,
Mhm.
but these guys already get more days off than even just 10 years ago.
Right.
They have 20 days off, scheduled days off, compared to forever in Major League Baseball there was only 10. So
Right.
they already have built-in days off, and it the idea of when an off day is coming for, let's say, Jose Altuve,
Mhm.
that's predetermined well before the day. It's almost like it's on a schedule,
I
and it
think it is
comes
on a schedule,
and
they
it
just
comes
don't
from
tell us.
upstairs. It
Yeah.
comes from upstairs. It doesn't come from Joe Espada.
Right.
Joe, in a way, is kind of the old saying. I can't remember which old manager said, or Earl Weaver or something. Managers are hired to be fired.
Yep.
You know, and they're made. The job is you are a scapegoat.
That's
But
right.
I don't think Joe Espada has really done
No.
anything in this situation, including some of the in-game moves, because I think some of those come from analytics departments and come from
Mhm.
upstairs, higher in the organization. So, like I said, Joe. But when these guys get fired, let's say a strength and conditioning coach. Okay, what kind of stretching are we doing? Here's a question: are the players doing any stretching? Because you can't make these players do anything at all.
Right.
These are all type A personalities at the pinnacle of their profession. And you don't tell those dudes what to do. You can suggest, you can kind of lead them, try to guide them. But
Mhm.
if I don't want to, if I don't want to do, extra hamstring stretches, then I'm not going to do extra hamstring stretches.
I tell you, there is a part of me that's like, are they practicing under power lines? Like, is this a cancer cluster? Like,
Right.
do they need a
Right.
live
Right.
chicken or something to get
There
the
you
curse
go.
off? I mean,
That's right.
like, I
That's
just
right.
feel like there's
Don't go with
it just
KFC.
right. It just
Mhm.
feels weird. Like the whole thing. I mean, listen, in the statistical probability of it all, there's a good chance that this is random, that this is just bad luck,
Right.
on certain players with certain situations and whatever. And there's real good reason to believe there isn't any sort of behind the scenes conspiracy theory or tinfoil hat wearing problems.
Mhm.
But at the same time, when you look at it, you're like, wow, every year for the last 3 years, I mean, we are
Yeah.
just dropping like flies.
And everybody wants, it's just our culture. It's
Mhm.
just being
Yeah, it's
human.
true. You're
Everybody
right.
wants it
You're
to
right.
be a simple answer. The problem is they
Yeah.
don't stretch. The problem is they lift too much. The problem is they don't lift enough. You're
Right.
trying to have one answer when in reality there is no such thing. In
Right.
every situation, there's a different answer. I mean, we just had two starting pitchers go down within days of each other with the same injury. Do they
Mhm.
have anything to do with each other? Of course
No.
not.
No.
But we always like to have that simple one answer, you know, hit that says, okay, this is the problem, when that's not the
Right.
problem. And really, if you want the real problem, it's got nothing to do with, in my opinion, it's got nothing to do
Mm.
with, well, I won't say nothing to do. It's got very little to do with the medical staff. It's got little to do with the strength and conditioning staff. It falls on the players.
Right.
That's who it falls on. Whether you're dehydrated, you pull hamstrings, or quads or whatever. Whether
Mhm.
you lift too much and fatigue a muscle, and that muscle you go out and you get hurt.
Right.
You're throwing too hard in between starts. You're not throwing enough in between starts. I mean,
Right.
everything is so different. And, I always thought it was interesting that they've done it indirectly, but they've kind of pointed the finger in the Imai situation
Hmm.
at the program he went through in spring training. Okay, but that was
Right.
the same program he had been on the last several years in Japan, and he didn't have any kind of issues.
Yeah,
So,
I
you
think with
know,
Imai, I wonder too if it's just like if there's it's just a lot. You know what I mean? Like it's just exactly like it's been like this is a lot. Like he came over here, there's so much of a barrier. Who knows? But you know me, man. I hate conspiracy theories. I find them all like I've been awash in conspiracy theories
yeah,
with the Artemis thing and everybody
yeah,
saying like it makes me insane. So I don't believe any of that stuff. It is just unfortunate that all of it is coming down on the Astros. Like, listen,
right,
all of it came down on the Dodgers last year, too. The only difference
sure,
is that the Dodgers had a $500 million in payroll. So they were able to supplement what they lost with
yeah.
plenty of depth. The
And
Astros just can't
they
do
were
it.
able to tread water
Yes.
while things were going poorly, and you can honestly say things went poorly like all the whole regular season
Yeah, a
last year.
big chunk of it for
And
sure.
then, like the second week of September, all of a sudden they start getting their thoroughbreds back.
Yep.
And then, but even in the playoffs, it wasn't like this was a juggernaut that just walked through the league.
No,
That is in no way, shape, or form was that
no.
the truth.
They might be this year.
And I've always said this offseason that the Blue Jays were the better team. The Blue
Uh-huh.
Jays outplayed the Dodgers. They just didn't
Right.
get to 4 wins first. Now, obviously, that's what you're trying to do,
Right.
but yeah, it's always to me. I don't think where in most situations, especially with the CBA coming up, the players are always the bad guys. It's always the players. It's always the players. Except when you start talking about players going on the IL, and if you have a bunch of them, especially if you have some that are going down with the same injury, now all of a sudden you start looking at the organization. It's
Right.
still on the players. It's still on the players.
Right, exactly. All right, speaking of on the players, let's talk about on the officials. I'm very curious about your opinion about this.
Yeah.
I heard Todd and Blummer talking about this on the broadcast the other day, and it made me start thinking the ABS system has been, I think it's been great for baseball, but there is one interesting sort of caveat to that, and that is the strike zone is the top of the strike zone is 53% of your height. Um, the problem is for people, let's say you've got long legs or whatever, the proportions are a little off. And the Astros are a team that has for years now, along with they're not the only ones, but certainly
Mhm.
one of them who has preached the high fastball.
Yeah.
Pitching at the top of the zone rather because which was a huge change, right? Because for years people wanted you to throw at the bottom of the zone,
My
right?
generation.
Your
Yeah.
generation,
Down, down,
exactly.
down, 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 down.
Exactly. And so the Astros, along with like the Rays and I think the Guardians were in there and a few others, were like, no, let's pitch at the top of the zone. Well, now the top of the zone isn't really in the zone anymore.
Right.
And so you're getting a lot. And I think it was Michael Schwab yesterday. He posted a stat that was really incredible to me. It was talking about how the Astros had basically given up 20 runs above average on the fastball this year,
Mhm.
which is which is crazy when you consider league average is 0. They gave up 20 runs on the fastball, and that was
Right.
before yesterday, the day before. And a lot of those fastballs are up in the zone, right? So the question becomes, and the guys on the broadcast were talking about it, should there be an adjustment to instead of 53%, maybe it needs to be 55%, or maybe it needs to be flexible based on the person's measurements. Like
Well, that's
it
what it's
does seem
supposed to be.
right.
I mean, because you
Well, it
don't
is,
have a
but still
generic
53%.
height. You don't have a generic height that say, okay,
Right.
Major League Baseball height average is 6'1", so 53% of that, this is the top of the strike
Yeah,
zone.
but if
And
you
to
got
tell
a
you the truth,
short
if you did that, the umpires would probably be better.
right. But the
You
deal
know,
is if you have a short torso and long legs, the strike zone is going to be real weird. You know what I mean?
right?
Like that's,
And 63% to me just seems it just the number itself. So just barely over half my height is the
right.
top of the strike zone. Here's the problem with the top of the strike zone. Okay. And this idea of pitching up. The reason Brent Strom and company Josh Miller was part of that,
Hmm.
that started pushing the top of the zone. It wasn't because of the strike zone itself. It was because of the design of the major league swing, which is an uppercut swing.
Right.
So what happened is it took a long, long time for hitters to make the adjustment to what the pitchers were doing. And what we were doing was we throw the ball down at the bottom part of the zone and we hit the corners. Okay, the top part of the zone didn't really exist, at least not on purpose. There was a few guys that used to throw at the top of the zone, but it was down, 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 down. Well, it took
Hmm.
decades for the big league swing to materialize, and that's that get underneath. We call it launch angle swing, whatever you want to
Right.
call it. It used to be called rotational hitting, but it's an uppercut swing, which means in order to uppercut the pitch, what do you have to do? You have to get below the ball.
Right.
And so that's why you started seeing the fastball at the top of the zone, was because that was all of a sudden a hard pitch to get to. And the guy that Brent Strom used to use as his example was Josh Donaldson. Josh Donaldson, when his heyday, when he was in Toronto, you threw the ball outer third, the bottom of the knee, that might as well be right down the middle. And he's going to
Hmm.
hook that. And he's going to hit it out of the ballpark. Well, all of a sudden, I mean, that's where everybody was trying to throw. Now
Right.
pitchers had to make the adjustment, and hitters have made a little bit of an adjustment to it. But I think that we've gotten so caught up in the idea of where is the top of the strike zone.
Hmm.
A lot of times when I'm going to the top of the strike zone, I'm not going there for a strike. I'm going there to get the hitter to swing at it.
Swing. Yeah. Swing.
So what's really shocking about the numbers that you just said about how bad the Astros pitchers have been with the fastball is in previous years they don't throw that many fastballs.
Right.
It's
It's
always been
true.
majority. Over half of the pitches have been off speed pitches, and that still is the case. But when they're throwing fastballs, we're just not seeing the fastball command that we need. Because what do
Bad
hitters really
location.
hit? Hitters hit mistakes.
Right.
If you put the ball, you put the ball down the middle, that ball's supposed to be hit. Very
Yeah.
rarely is a pitcher trying to throw the ball down the middle.
And you have to wonder too, given the fact that the Astros have issued more walks than any other team in baseball by a very wide margin, and
There's your command issue.
their
Yeah.
whip is like 1.7 or something crazy. Um, that means that the fastball might be a person's most reliable pitch, right? It
Yeah.
might be the
Well, it's
one that they
supposed to. We're
can't.
supposed
They
to
Yeah.
pitch off of the fastball, but that's not the case anymore.
Right.
What you have now is everybody is mixing and matching from
Yeah.
really the pitch, pitch one. I mean, you talked to Verlander earlier in his career. What did he try and do? He tried to get through the lineup the first time, with 85% fastballs, maybe a couple breaking balls, and that's it. And then we'll start mixing when we get to the second at bat, uh, the second time through the lineup. Now that's not the case. Now you're throwing the kitchen sink from the first pitch, and there's a pretty simple reason why. Yeah, fastball velocity's up, but hitters still hit fastballs.
Yeah.
That's what they hit. You throw a good breaking ball, hitters don't usually hit those.
That's fascinating. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the worst thing in sports, and that's losing. Actually, I'm not even sure the worst thing in sports is losing. To me, sometimes the worst thing is mediocrity, but because it's
Right?
so boring. But losing, let's. So I'm curious. I mean, you obviously didn't have to suffer. When you played
Oh,
with
I
the
played on some
Yankees, you
bad
said
teams.
you
I
play,
played on
but
some bad teams
you
though.
play. What is that? I mean, mentally, this is the like I think you and I talked about this off the air. This has been 15 years since the Astros have had 8 losses in a row.
Mhm.
The last time they did it, they were in the midst of one of the worst 3 seasons
Oh my
in the
goodness.
history of the Astros, some of the worst three in the history of baseball.
Saying
And
saying that they lost 100 games, that ain't anywhere close to the real
oh no,
numbers. They
the
lost well
103
over 100
3 years in a row.
games.
They lost almost 400 games in like
Yes,
4 years. I
they
mean, it's
they lost,
crazy.
and the highest total I think was in 2013. They
Hmm.
were 51 and 111.
Unreal,
That's crazy.
like unreal. And obviously at that time it was a totally different team. We're talking about a team that was
Oh,
filled
sure.
with veterans that were getting traded away, a bunch of youngsters being
Complete
called up.
transition.
It was
Yeah,
a complete, and everybody knew what the deal was, right?
yeah.
This is a different thing. This is a team that's been put together ostensibly to make a run into the postseason. What does this do to players when they go through this? I mean, does it affect them as much as we like to think it does? As much as it certainly, I can't affect them as much as it affects fans, but how does it impact player psyche?
It does. It does. And what it is this is a game that is, one of the most important things a player can have is confidence. And there's many levels of confidence. There's different kinds of confidence. One of the things I kind of describe this is there's two kinds of confidence that a player has. He's got his day-to-day confidence, which goes on the roller coaster. You
Mhm.
know, I struck out 3 times yesterday. Of course, I don't feel as good today as I did before the game yesterday.
Right.
And then there's a deeper confidence that I call the core confidence. Now, there is no scientific proof to any of this. This is just my deranged brain trying to put a label on some things. But the core
Deranged.
confidence is,
Nice.
can I play this sport? Can I actually do this? And when you have a long standing stint of negativity, then that core confidence can be affected also, and that's the
Mhm.
one you really have to guard against. But when a team loses, does it affect you? Yes, it absolutely affects you. We say baseball is supposed to be fun. Baseball is only fun when you win.
Right.
Okay. Now, does that mean you have to win every day? No. But if you win more times than you lose, then you're probably going to have a little bit of fun. Uh, each person it affects differently. Each player has a different mental approach.
Mhm.
Some players are tougher than others. Some players have a different reaction, where some guys get more subdued and withdrawn. Other guys get mad. You see the guys throwing things and things like in the dugout and yelling and screaming and getting in fights and all that kind of stuff. So everybody has a different effect, but it absolutely 100% affects you. Astros have always been pretty good at in situations like this, where things aren't going well. They all say the right things.
Mhm.
They say the cliches. We play the game one at a time. Today's game doesn't have anything to do with yesterday's
Yeah.
game.
The Craig
It's all
Biggio
BS. It's all BS.
it's
Yeah,
the Craig Biggio, school of media
that's right.
relations.
That's right. Yeah, the cliches. Here are
That's
your
right.
cliches. Crash Davis will tell you what they are.
Exactly, 100%. Take it one day at a time, God willing. Yeah, it's this interesting thing to me with sports because in professional sports, these are paid men playing and
True.
women playing sports. They're compensated, most of them pretty well.
Hmm.
Even the ones at the lower levels are compensated better than average.
Sure.
Uh, but these are still the thing that I think escapes some people sometimes is that ultimately these guys are insane competitors. I mean, you cannot be a great professional anything unless you have some level of obsession. That's just how it is.
No doubt.
The best athletes have always been the guys and women who are obsessed with
Hmm.
their sport, obsessed with training, I remember reading about like JJ Watt years ago
Yeah.
and talking about how he had his house in Wisconsin and he had like a whole barn that was nothing but like a workout facility. And he was in there from like 4 a.m. to 4 p.m. like every day and in bed by 7. I'm like, what in the
Right.
it's like
Yeah.
it's just stuff like that. Like
Where's the
these guys.
quality of life? Yeah.
Exactly, right? But that is it. That's it. They live and breathe this stuff, right?
Mhm.
And I mean, you were there.
Mhm.
And so what I think is not surprising to me when you say that it affects them in that way. I'm curious, does it impact what you think about your team? Like, does it change
Sure.
on a team sport? How does it impact how you sort of view the lens of your organization? But never
Yeah.
mind yourself.
Yeah. It affects everything.
Mm,
And once you start getting a little longer in the tooth, you get more established in the big leagues. Now you try and leave what happens at work. You go home to the wife, you go home to the
mhm.
kids. Does it still affect you? Of course it does.
Yeah,
I can't go out there and give up 3 runs in a third of an inning and go home and be just my regular happy, play with the kid self. I'm still going to do
sure.
that stuff, but that doesn't mean inside my heart and inside my head that everything is copacetic. That ain't really how it
Mhm,
works. That's that day to day confidence that kind of wavers with whatever's happening.
mhm.
And it's the same thing with the team. There's times that you look at a team and you go, okay, yeah, dude, we're rocking and rolling right now. We
Mhm.
may not have the best lineup compared to some of the other teams, but man, are we just playing good baseball? And then there's other times you go, why aren't we making moves? Why aren't we doing things? The funny thing is, if you talk to a baseball player, if you go out to lunch with them away from the stadium, you're
Mhm.
going to talk baseball the whole time. That's
Right.
what you're going to talk about. I mean, you'll get over the pleasantries. How's your wife? How's your kids? Yeah. What do
Mhm.
you think about that call last night? And that's what that's the
Well,
conversation.
that's
When you're
that's
at the stadium,
mhm.
baseball's the last thing you talk about.
Oh, that's fascinating.
You
Yeah,
can
you
talk
took
about
anything else.
everything else.
You know,
Everything else.
it's funny you say that because, having been a professional musician for a long time, it's exactly the same. It's
Right.
exactly the same. When
Right.
you're at a gig, nobody's talking about the gig. Nobody's
That's
talking
right.
about playing. Nobody's talking about music. They're talking about anything but that. The minute you leave, it's all you're talking about is
That's it.
gear, and that's all
That's
it
right.
is. And I've heard that same thing. Like I always loved watching the Jerry Seinfeld series, that comedians in cars getting coffee, because
Hmm.
it's comedians talking to one another, and it's so funny because you can see they share this language and this sort of like, and I think
Right.
that's the way it is with anybody who has a job,
Sure.
that
Well,
is kind of
especially
all
as much
encompassing.
time as they sp-
Yeah,
as you spend together.
all that all
Musicians,
encompassing
all the
thing of,
practice, all the
yeah,
everything, and the love for what you're doing.
yeah, exactly. Because you're not there for the
Baseball.
money.
Very few times do you run into a teammate or a player that doesn't just love being at the ballpark. There's a
Yeah.
few of them, and I won't mention any names, but there's a few of them. But most of them, there's just a love for what you do.
Yeah.
So, you always, when you're playing or whatever, you always say, "Well, baseball is what I do. It's not who I am." Yeah,
Yeah.
that in some ways that's true, but a lot of ways that's a complete and total lie because
That's
it takes all of you in order to go out there and perform because there's so many negatives
yeah.
in really anything you're doing. There's so many negatives in baseball. Time away from your family, the beat,
Mhm.
the constant pounding on your body, just just the grind of the schedule,
Yeah.
the grind of what the sport is, all the negativity and just
Yeah.
built into the sport. So you have to love it. If you didn't love it, it would drive you nuts.
Well, it's this I mean, it's the old adage, right? The old adage about you can take the player out of the game, but you can't take the game out of the player. I
Right.
mean, it's just part of who you are inherently, especially if you do it for that long with that much
Right.
intent. You just can't escape it at that point. It's very rare that people can transition out of one thing very seriously into another thing very
Mhm.
seriously. It almost never happens because your brain is just hardwired at some point, and that's
Well,
just how it is.
it just becomes who you are. And
Yeah.
there have been times that I have gotten sick of the sport,
Mhm.
and I didn't pay that much attention to it. But over time, it just you just kind of migrate back to it
It
because
seeps
it's
back
it's
in.
been it's been such a huge part of my life, my whole life. I mean, we talk a lot about even high schoolers now, high school baseball,
Mhm.
even college baseball. They'll have a few days of spring break. They'll play maybe through Wednesday or Thursday and then have, the long weekend and they won't
Mhm.
practice or anything. Dude, I didn't have a spring break until like 2009 or 10. And I'm talking this goes all the way back to when I was a kid
Right.
because spring break you always played. Heck, when I was in high school, we played every day.
Well,
When I
yeah.
was in college, we may play 12 games over the All-Star break, over spring
Yeah.
break.
Well, you got
We'd
time.
play,
You're
yeah,
not in school,
because
right?
those were the times that the rules didn't count.
Right.
UIL or
Yeah.
NCAA, those rules didn't count because we're not in school.
Right, you're not in school. That's exactly right. No, I totally get it. I mean, especially when you're obsessed with something like that,
But
it just makes sense.
one last quick. I know we need to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Losing is contagious.
Mm.
When someone gets into a negative, thought process, that can kind of seep over to someone else. And then that can, just like winning is also,
Yeah.
you go back to the natural, it's like the bubonic plague. Yeah. I mean,
Right.
it really is that, you try not to take someone down with you if you're struggling.
Mhm.
And sometimes you don't even have to, because a lot of times what happens is the other player tries to make up for what you're doing or you're not
Right.
doing, and that screws him up too. So,
Right.
it's just one of those. It's a cycle, and a major league team, a baseball team at any level, is a living, breathing entity as a whole, and
Mhm.
so one part of the team absolutely affects another part.
It's a great point. I hopefully the Astros can figure out a way to break free from this whatever.
They
Like I
need to
said,
tread water. They
voodoo.
need to win a couple games,
Right.
play 500 until you can start getting your dudes back
Right.
and get on a roll, because that's really, the whole adage I said earlier, you can't lose it in April, or you can't win it in April, you can lose it in April. That's
Right.
what happened. You dig the hole so deep. What the Astros did a couple of years ago is 100% the aberration. What was it,
Yep.
12 or 13 games under 500, and
Yes.
in a matter of a couple of weeks they're in first place. Yeah,
Well,
that stuff just don't happen.
the problem they had is they started poorly, but then they kind of bumped up and then they got worse. And like that's what that
Yeah.
can't happen right now. Like you start poorly, okay, fine, but you've got to pick it up at this point. They've got, they've got a chance to do that, whether they can or
But
not.
sample size still being small, you have plenty of baseball to do it, but that's
Right.
also means you have plenty of baseball to continue to screw things
Exactly. Oh my God. Such good news, such positive news.
up.
Thanks everybody for joining us. As always, we appreciate you seeing us. You appreciate you watching us on video, listening to us, catching up. Mike, when is your next podcast, by the way?
Noon today. Noon today.
All
We'll
right.
have another episode for Back to the Bullpen. You can find us on the Locked On MLB channel. Back to the Bullpen podcast is inside that channel on YouTube,
Nice.
Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Please like, subscribe, all that kind of good stuff. And every weekday at noon right now, we are dropping a new episode.
Awesome. That sounds killer. Well, I can't wait to hear it.
Actually,
Every
News Central. I guess I need to say it. News
Oh,
Central.
no, sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
you do. We do need to say that central.
Yeah.
That is right. We
Yeah.
don't. There are people listening all over the place.
That's right.
So thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. We will talk to you next time. As always, go Astros.